Good afternoon and welcome to the continuation of the October 26th, 2021 Lane County Board of Commissioners meeting. We are on item 14 now, Public Works. This is a long item, so bear with me, but we are on 14A, fifth reading and deliberations, ordinance number PA 1385 in the matter of amending the Lane County Rural Comprehensive Plan to add a quarry to the inventory of significant mineral and aggregate sites, authorize mining and processing as provided by Oregon Administrative Rules OAR 660-023-0180, amending the RCP to redesignate land from Forest F to Natural Resource, Mineral, and rezone that land from non-impacted forest land F1 zone to quarry and mine operations QM zone, requiring site review of the proposed mining operations pursuant to Lane Code 16.257 (4)A-J, repealing ordinance number PA 1363 and ordinance number PA 1343, and adopting savings and severability clauses. And, sorry, Order 21-10-26-06 in the matter of denying an application on remand from Land Use Board of Appeals to amend the Lane County Rural Comprehensive Plan, RCP, to add a quarry to the inventory of significant mineral and aggregate sites, authorize mining and processing as provided by Oregon Administrative Rules OAR 660-023-0180, amend the RCP to redesignate land from Forest F to Natural Resource, Mineral NR:M, and rezone that land from non-impacted forest land F1 zone to quarry and mine operations QM zone, requiring site review of the proposed mining operations pursuant to Lane Code 16.257 (4)A-J, remand number 2, planning file 509, PA 20-05535, remand number 1, planning file 509, PA 18-05392, original planning files 509-PA15-05803 and 509-PA15-05804, applicant Old Hazeldale Quarry. At this time, I'm to call for disclosures of any board ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, or biases. Are there any board members who feel they must abstain from taking part in this proceeding due to conflicts of interest or biases? Seeing none. Are there board members that wish to disclose any ex parte contacts, and if so, do such contacts preclude the board member from acting impartially? Seeing none. Deanna Wright, if you could provide us the staff report for this item.
Good afternoon, Chair and Board of Commissioners. I'm Deanna Wright, and in the meeting room with me is also Planning Director Amber Bell. Before I do get into my staff report presentation today, I am going to turn it over to County Counsel Andy Clark to discuss an email that we received yesterday from the applicant's agent. Andy, are you available?
I am. Chair Bernie and Commissioners. I just wanted to give, just want to let you know, if you haven't seen it, I sent an email to you forwarding an objection from applicant's counsel, sort of pertaining to the board's decision at the last meeting to not reopen the record. I have provided that letter to you all along with my analysis, and I think it speaks for itself. If you want me to go over it, I can, but otherwise I'll just entertain any questions you have. for me, and then after that we can proceed into the rest of the staff report.
Since we're in a public meeting, do you think, Mr. Clark, you could simply paraphrase the objection in your response?
I will do my best. Yes, primarily the objection has to do with the applicant's complaint that, well, essentially assertion that the board was required to reopen the record. I think it stemmed from a misreading or misinterpretation of our rule and the statute. Our rule and the statute parallel one another. And essentially the way they read is that at the end of a hearing, or before the end of the hearing, any of the parties can request the record be left open for additional information. Both the rule and the statute, the language of it, sort of presuppose that that's a one-step process. That is, the record's left open, additional information is added to the record, and then the record's closed again. The rule then goes on to say that if anybody wants to respond to that new information, they can request that the board reopen the record to allow responses to the new information. Our long-standing process at the county has been to deal with that in sort of a three-step process, and that is, rather than leave the record open, close it, and then reopen it, we simply leave it open for set periods of time, 3 steps. The first step, I think as you're all familiar, is to allow any new evidence into the record. The second step is to allow anybody to respond to the new evidence that came into the record. And then the last step is providing to the applicant the opportunity to issue sort of final rebuttal or summation of their case. That is what was done here last time. The short of that is that as a result, the applicant had an opportunity to respond to the new evidence that came in, and primarily the new evidence that the applicant wants more opportunity to respond to is the letter from ODF&W discussing the big game conflicts that the board is well aware of. As I said, the applicant has had an opportunity to respond to that as part of step 2 in the county's open record procedures. The second piece of the argument essentially boils down to the assertion that the applicant needed more time to respond to the information that came in, the ODF&W record, and that the essentially step number 2 in our open records policy didn't provide enough time for them to adequately respond. As I note in what I gave to the board this afternoon, how long the open record periods are is essentially a matter of board discretion. If it were decidedly unreasonable, like 1 day or a couple of hours, then I could see the complaint. But in here, there hasn't been an assertion that the board abused its discretion in time periods it assigned. And essentially, my opinion on it is that the board would have been, it would have been reasonable for the board to acquiesce to the applicant's desire to have the record reopened. Similarly, I think it's reasonable for the board to do what it did, which is to have the record stay closed, determining that there had been sufficient time for the applicant to respond. So that's where things lie. At this point, I suppose the board can reconsider its decision to leave the record closed or not at your desire. But I'm available for any questions you have on that.
I think you did an excellent job. Thank you, Mr. Clark. Are there questions for Mr. Clark on that before Ms. Wright provides her? Yes, Vice Chair Farr.
Thank you. I think, a part of my response is that if the applicant needs further time to respond, then we should be able to acquiesce to them having as much time, whatever the response is, and whichever side the response is regarding the open record. So I personally would prefer that we reopen the record, allowed further response, simply because if we don't, it's going to come back down the road, and to reopen the record, allow the response, allows us to address the issues in sooner than later. So my preference at this point, Mr. Clark and Chair Burney, would be to reopen the record, allow for further response from the applicant, and then subsequently close the record after that. But the question that I have, Chair Burney, is Mr. Clark, the applicant states that they did not have sufficient time to respond. And I don't know what sufficient time is, and I don't know that it's fair for me to ask you if they had sufficient time. But in your opinion, if you care to give your opinion, was there time? Was there sufficient time? Once again, a lot of mitigating circumstances that may make it impossible for you to answer. But please.
Yeah, probably it's difficult for me to say. I think the most I can probably say is that it was really reasonable either way. That is to allow the reopening or not. Either decision is supportable. I think clearly the difficulty here for the applicant is that it's sort of the main issue of contention that remains in this proceeding. That is whether these conflicts that the board has identified with big game can be minimized or not. In I guess our discussions where we've left it is there hasn't been enough information to indicate that the conflict had been minimized. I think that's what the applicant is attempting to do by working with ODF&W, but haven't been able to get there as of yet. And so I don't know how much time, honestly, it would take for the applicant and ODF&W to get to a point where they were both comfortable saying, yeah, these conflicts have been minimized. And so it, without that information, it's pretty hard to get.
Thank you, Councillor. And my feeling on that once again is that time is kind of a subjective thing. And if the applicant did not have time to respond to what is a pretty important piece of information, then they should be granted more time to do so. And as far as reopening, closing the record, we don't want to do that on an ongoing basis, but I think it would be prudent for us to reopen the record at this point in time, just to allow this response to occur, and have a fixed time certain that the record would be closed, so that the applicant and ODFW knows what the deadline is, that there's going to be nothing beyond that.
The vice chair would love to hear what other commissioners have to say, as would I. Yes, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I feel like we're rehashing a conversation we already had last time, and the circumstances haven't necessarily changed to a point where it makes sense for us to go through the same deliberations we've already done. So at this point, I'm interested in just moving forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. I think, one of the critical pieces that the applicant's attorney brings out in their most recent correspondence today is the fact that ODF, on that very last day, in the last hours of having the record open, invited them to meet with them and then develop a habitat management plan. Time to coordinate and do a meeting during COVID with state staff and then prepare a habitat management plan just did not seem reasonable in the period we had to respond to new information for the applicant. I agree with the applicant. There's nothing harmed for the county to reopen the record and allow additional information. It also gives opponents a chance to address that additional information just the same. And the only reason I can think of moving forward on this is a determination to not have the quarry be successful. A needed aggregate resource in a remote area of East Lane County that will avoid a lot of trucking. And, we all know we have a shortage of truckers right now. A lot of trucking costs will bring down the cost of construction in that remote area of East Lane County. And in addition, will convert some property that is now not contributing a lot to the Lane County tax rolls into a very high value piece of property on our tax rolls as we look for revenue for other purposes here at Lane County. So I see every reason in the world to reopen this record as the applicant requested. I don't think it is precedent setting. I don't think there's any reason we can't, unless it's just purely the desire of commissioners to shut this thing down and send it back to zero. And that sounds like apparently what is afoot here is state what you want, which is that you want to not have, a new aggregate resource in East Lane County. Because, we all know that Springfield's lived with an aggregate resource next door to it for years without negative impacts and having the impacts mitigated. So I fail to see how and why anyone on this board could be opposed to reopening the record.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anything, Commissioner Trigger, or no? No. Andy, or Mr. Clark, I'm sorry, if I may, when was our first reading of this? When did this hit the board and we begin this process? Can you refresh my memory?
The first reading information I have is April 6th of 2021.
Okay.
And I'll note you had a hearing and a public hearing on the 20th of April and a continued hearing May 4th.
Thank you very much. And when was our last hearing? Forgive me, I'm sorry.
Just close that. The continued hearing was May 4th. The last reading and deliberations were August 3.
Thank you. I think it's conceivable that people might come to a conclusion, not with the criteria that Commissioner Bozovich suggested. I myself, who voted for the last opportunity we had to provide quarry and mining, voted yes on it. In this instance, I voted no. I failed to understand why the day before we are to finalize what was already approved as a denial on the basis of that issue with ODF, with no new information coming, rehashing the same thing as we have now through 5 public hearings, why we would just continue to take board time on this. So that's where I stand. Before there's a response to that, Commissioner Bozovich, do any other commissioners want to make any statement before I call on Commissioner Bozovich? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Birdie. And none of us wants to continue this ad nauseum, obviously, because we have to come to a conclusion at some point. But as we all know, new information does come forward, and sometimes it comes forward at the last moment. And sometimes an offer for negotiation comes forward at the last moment, which requires an adjustment in the timing. That's, I believe, where we are at this point in time, Chair Bernie. So that's where I stand on it.
And Commissioner Bozovich, I'll allow you to correct me, but from what I very quickly read in Mr. Clark's correspondence this afternoon, I don't believe there is new information in there, but tell me if I'm incorrect. Commissioner Bozovich.
Well, I think Mr. Clark maybe gave you some bad information about when the first reading on this was. We had the first reading on this years ago. In fact, it was Commissioner Stewart was the East Lane commissioner at the time, and we even held a public hearing at the high school in Oak Ridge on this project. So this process has been going on for years, and it seems very abrupt for the board to not be willing to reopen a record to maybe correct one issue relative to this. Now, mind you, quarry mining operations have to meet multiple standards, and all of those, except for this one issue, have been worked out on this quarry application. And throwing away years of process, years of cost, the fees that were involved in applying for the amendments to the zoning and the amendments to our rural comprehensive plan over the fact that we just don't want to reopen a record seems to be anti-aggregate resources, which is anti-housing cost, which is also anti-carbon footprint because you're going to truck it from somewhere else because aggregate's needed no matter what. So the only thing I can conclude is there is some reason this board wants to disapprove this project rather than just allow records. It doesn't mean we're going to approve it. All it does is give the applicant an opportunity to remedy one final issue, and then we can make a decision. But what we're doing is we're cutting that multi-year process off at the knees and saying, we're just going to deny this because the applicant couldn't quite get that management plan done in the time period that we arbitrarily set. So I will just say that, I could make the motion again to reopen the record, but I'm not hearing support for that other than from the vice chair. But just know that if we move forward with this, it'll be on a 3-2 vote, and those that support this denial are throwing away years of work and are going against what would support affordable housing, lower carbon footprints, and provide jobs and revenue for this county.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to suggest that we now hear the staff report. And after we hear the staff report, there's an opportunity for us to deliberate, which is what we kind of jumped into a bit prematurely. Is that okay with the rest of the commissioners? Well, Ms. Wright, I know you have a report for us.
Yes, this is Deanna Wright, and Planning Director Amber Bell. When we last met, during the August 3rd board deliberations, the key issue that remained was impacts to big game resources. To review, during the board's deliberations in August, staff understood the board to conclude that the letters from Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife demonstrated that mining activities would result in impacts to big game, and that the applicant's proposed conditions of approval were inadequate to sufficiently minimize significant impacts to big game. Specifically, concerns centered on displacement and loss of habitat to deer and elk within the 1,500-foot impact area. It was apparent at the end of last deliberations that the fundamental question was answered, which was whether the identified conflicts to big game were minimized as required by Oregon Administrative Rule 660-023-0180 sub 5. This approval criteria directs an ESEE analysis to be completed where a conflict cannot be minimized. Staff completed the ESEE determination since we last met, and has included those findings in Exhibit B for the board's consideration. The 3 motions in the agenda cover memo include adopt the order, revise the order and findings, or move to approve the ordinance number PA 1385. The fundamental question today is, does the board agree with the drafted findings that they accurately reflect the board's ultimate decision? Staff will summarize the ESEE in some of the following slides, and then the board may then deliberate on the matter. If the board directs further revisions, staff's happy to prepare those revisions to the findings and return to the board on a later date. An ESEE entails evaluating individual ESEE elements such as the economic, social, environmental, and energy, and asking what is the long or short-term consequences of the positives and negatives resulting from allowing, not allowing, or limiting mining. An ESEE is based upon evidence in the record, and the ESEE within Exhibit B contains 3 sections. There's an introduction, an identification of the ESEE consequences, and additional consideration for the OER with the ESEE conclusion. As for the economic element conclusion, the ESEE found that the mine will bring positive economic benefits to the owner and region. The negative economic consequence was a possible damage to nearby private properties and from relocated elk herds. And on the balance, the positive economic benefits outweigh the negative ones. The social element conclusion The applicant identified a positive social result of allowing the mine is positive social esteem for the workers employed at the mine and benefits associated with using the aggregate to fill regional transportation improvement projects. The negative consequence of allowing the mine was the loss of big game habitat. However, staff understood the board's position in last deliberation was that the conflicts to big game habitat is not sufficiently minimized to a level that's not significant. Thus, the negative social consequences and the applicant has not demonstrated conflicts have been reduced to a level that is not significant. Additionally, the applicant did not demonstrate any positive environmental consequence. As such, the negative environmental consequence outweighed the positive consequences. As far as the energy element conclusion went, the applicant identified two positive consequences. One of them is the aggregate from the mine would assist in completion of transportation improvements. And number two, the mine is one of few aggregate sites located in the area, therefore reducing the distance that the product needed to travel to serve the area, resulting in lower fuel costs and energy saving. The negative energy consequence identified was that it's going to employ vehicles and machinery in the extraction process. However, we'll point out that the applicant's air quality related conditions of approval minimize impacts. Thus, on the balance, the energy consequence slightly favored allowing the mine, as trucks will not have to travel further distance to the project. So based on the ESE findings, does the board conclude that two elements, energy and economic, lead in favor of allowing the mine, while two elements, environmental and social, lead in favor of not allowing the mine? Additionally, would the board conclude that the positive economic, social, and energy consequences associated with allowing the mine are outweighed by the negative consequence, both in number and degree? If so, then the ESE findings attached in Exhibit B support not allowing the mine, and the board may recommend denial of the remand application. So finally, again, here's the three motions listed in the agenda cover memo for your review. This does conclude my staff report. At this time, staff are available for questions should they arise during your deliberations.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wright. Ms. Bell, anything else before the board moves into further deliberation?
No, I think Deanna covered it. I don't have anything to add, except I will mention that Ann Davies, principal attorney with Plain Council Government, has provided some technical assistance in preparing the draft findings. So should the board have any questions, she's also available on the line to answer questions regarding the EC analysis.
Thank you very much. At this point, we can continue the deliberations that were occurring, or we can choose not to reopen the record. And I'm sure commissioners want to weigh in on that. Yes, Vice Chair Farr.
Thanks, Chair Burnett. I do have a couple of questions. So the remaining issue then is the big game habitat within 1,500 feet of the mining operation. Is that correct?
Yes, Vice Chair Farr.
Thank you. And so the long list of conditions that were that surfaced in the last, I think, I was vice chair when Commissioner Stewart was the chair up in Oak Ridge. I think it's been 5 years. In the 5 years, all of the conditions that rose have been addressed except for the big game issue within 1,500 feet. And I guess I've got a question about that. The findings that we're reading today are findings that you've adopted based upon the instructions given to you by the board to adopt, I would guess, so that findings can change based on what the board wants to hear, I think. But I'm looking at the map right now, and we're talking about big game impact within 1,500 feet of the mining operation. And I'm looking at the map, and I see that 67 miles to the east, 67 miles to the east of that 1,500 feet is Lapine, which is the next city between Oak Ridge and Lapine, east of Oak Ridge. So we have, basically 67 miles of big game habitat. So it's a relatively small big game habitat, critical though it may be, that we're talking about here. It's not a big swath. It's not a power line running from Bonneville to California. This is just a small little spot of big game habitat. So am I correct in that? It doesn't go beyond the direct impact of the 1,500 feet of the mine. Is that right? It's not something that stretches to Waldo Lake, the impact. Is that right?
As far as the OAR criteria go, we can only evaluate impacts within 1,500 feet of the mining site. So only the 1,500 foot is where we would measure the impacts to big game.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And Waldo Lake is directly to the east, but it's about 40 miles to the east. So, there's a lot of big game habitat between this 1,500 feet and Lapine. That's just a statement. So, Chair Burney, I'm going to listen to what other folks have to say about this. All of the impacts of the mine have been mitigated, including dust, including noise, including truck traffic, all of the things that have been mitigated that really potentially could have been huge stumbling blocks, but they were mitigated. This one, the big game habitat, which is a little dot in the middle of a vast, basically wilderness area, is the one that we're asking to potentially reopen the record on. So that's just my statement. Let's hear what others have to say.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Other commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to respond to that a bit. Clearly, we have to look within the 1,500 feet, and that is what we have done, and staff has spent a lot of time on. And there is actually significant impact to big game in that area, and that is one of the issues that we do have to consider. And our animals and our environment are significant. I appreciate the SE analysis that really spells out the pros and cons of the impact of this particular quarry application. There are clearly other positives, but the environmental impact is clearly outweighed those positive impacts. And we should be, really considering those things. I know not everybody on the board is going to agree on this particular item, but we can't ignore the fact of the environmental impact either. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Well, this seems to be the same order that we've got. Yes, Commissioner Bozovich.
So I will agree with Commissioner Buck in that the criteria is the criteria, and we do have to look within that 1,500, and we unfortunately have to ignore the 67 miles to Lapine. But we could resolve that issue by reopening the record and allowing the applicant to address that particular issue. We have an EC that shows that there is significant positive impact to having this quarry in place. And the only negative impacts are relative to big game habitat to balance it onto the negative side of the EC. If it's possible, and we don't know yet because we haven't allowed the applicant to submit a possible remedy, if they remedy that issue of big game habitat, it swings the EC vastly over to the positive side, and this becomes a net positive for Lane County. The only thing is we just have to reopen the record. And with that, I'd like to move that we reopen the record on Old Hazeldale Quarry. And if I can get a positive vote on that, then I'll make a motion relative to the reading and setting the next reading and time periods for records to be held open. But I just want to see if there's support to reopen the record.
Does anyone notice how Commissioner Fall always asks me that if a motion to be made, but Commissioner Boza just goes in there and makes it. Okay, Commissioner. We'll
Is my right?
Oh, I'm just, forgive my tongue in cheek. You're making that motion. You have every right to make it. Let's hear if there's a second, and we'll continue our discussion.
Second.
Okay. Commissioner Bozovich, you moved, Vice Chair Farr seconded. For lack of a better thing, just reopening the record, correct? Okay. May we continue? We will discuss the motion and continue our conversation. Does any other commissioner wish to speak on this item? Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I believe we've provided ample time. Clearly, this has been going on for several years. And we did ask the applicant in our very last public hearing if there was anything more, and there was not. Nothing new has come to our attention since then. And at this point, I believe both the applicant and the people of the community deserve to be able to settle this. That said, there's always a possibility, whatever we decide today, for an appeal. And so this may not be the end of this, whatever we do today. Just want to make that very clear to the public that is watching.
Thank you, Commissioner. A couple of comments, if I may. One is, when we last were dealing, I want to say, was it August 3rd? I don't have the exact date, but in August, when this was last on the commissioner docket, we had the same discussion. And by the way, Commissioner Buck is 100% correct. Whatever we vote does not mean the end of it. Oregon land use laws will allow an appeal. An appeal will probably be made. It may end up that we're dealing with this again. But for right now, there has been no new information. In fact, that's why I asked Mr. Clark for his opinion, because what did we get? We didn't get new information. We got an accusatory letter from the applicant's attorneys saying that we broke the law by coming to the decision we made, that we did an unlawful act. And that's why I asked Mr. Clark that, because that's a tad offensive. It's like within the right of elected officials, after 5 readings and multiple opportunities for input, to come to a conclusion, which isn't the end of it. And that's what we did. So rather than getting new information, we were told that we weren't allowed to do what we did. And honestly, that's why I asked Mr. Clark, were we or weren't we? So with that, I agree with Commissioner Buck. Yes, I know commissioners, but first Commissioner Bozovich and then Commissioner Farr. I agree with Commissioner Buck. I think that it's important. And here's another thing. As Commissioner Farr pointed out, and Commissioner Bozovich lamented that we can't really talk about the other 67 miles. Here's something else we cannot talk about. We cannot talk about the forest that has been engulfed by fire and that has impacted this area and has impacted big game grounds. We cannot talk about the scars left by forest fires and how that is and is going to create additional erosion and flooding, which again will negatively impact the grounds for this species. And we also can't and don't talk about that all life is tied to all life. And as various ecosystems become imbalanced, they have economic impacts on other ecosystems. We can't talk about that either. So we're not. We're staying focused on the narrow scope, and we are coming to a conclusion. And that conclusion, some commissioners and some members of the public may agree with, others may not, and there are options for appeal. So I just want to restate that it's not this cutting off at the knees. It's not the end of anything. It's a decision made by a public body. Yes, first Commissioner Bozovich and then Vice Chair Farr.
So I'll just remind the board that one of the things about forest fires is you need roads available to get access to fight them, and it requires aggregate to maintain those roads. But I want to talk about something that's just simple about this request. This is about being fair. Fair with an applicant that has spent 5 years in the process. Simple facts go along with this. On May 18th, Christopher Yee submitted a letter to the county on the very last day the record was open. That came almost 5 years after the original application was placed in 3 years after UDF started coordinating with the applicant. So last second letter. On June 1, the applicant requested the record be reopened within 2 weeks of that time period. So we had a request in at the county almost right away to reopen the record. It just seems like it's a fair thing to do to reopen the record. Has nothing to do with anything other than that, than being fair to an applicant that has spent years and thousands of dollars moving this application all the way down to one final sticking point. So, you know, that's the question before the board is, do you want to be fair to the applicant and reopen the record? Or are you just, you know, purely blindly against, you know, having, you know, any sort of quarry in this area and you just want to shut this down and this is your excuse to shut this down? That's what it seems like is happening, because we had a very legitimate request very quickly from the applicant to have the record reopened. And those are facts. There's letters in the record, May 18th, June 1. So do you want to be fair? Support the motion to reopen the record. If you're ready to just shut this thing down for other reasons, vote against it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Vice Chair Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. And just two quick points. One is that I believe Mr. Clark can confirm this. We did get the accusatory letter that you mentioned, Chair Bernie, accusatory, whatever it may be. There was also another letter that was submitted that was suppressed because the record had been closed. It would have addressed the record. So that letter, which I have not seen, which Mr. Clark, I believe, has in his possession or it's someplace in our records, there is another letter. More information has been submitted beyond the letter that you cited, Chair Bernie. So they did respond with more than just an accusatory letter. But the things that we can't talk about, we can't talk about the fact that it's 67 miles to Lapine and much further than that north to golly, it looks like Government Camp is the next city to the north. So so that being said, we cannot talk about the fact that it was lamented how many truckloads of gravel would be hauled out of there, truckloads in, truckloads out, and that gravel wasn't a created need, that's meeting a need, and that every single truckload that was lamented pulling out of there will be driven from someplace far more remote than that to wherever the aggregate is needed. We can't talk about that in this particular discussion. All we're talking about right now is, do we reopen the record or not? And I agree with Commissioner Bozovich. It's been a long time getting to this point, and nobody wants to take this any further. But allowing this one response to the big game habitat, I believe, is not only a fair thing to do, I also think it's the prudent thing to do. And so I hope we get a yes vote on this. And I'm prepared to hear what other commissioners may have to say. Don't think about the 67 miles to Lapine or the 112 miles to Government Camp. Don't think about the dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of truckloads of gravel that will be shipped up from the valley or some other remote place to the site of its need. Think about, should we reopen the record or not?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Andy Clark, County Council. If I can just respond really quickly and confirm Chair Farr's statement that, as I noted in my email to the board this afternoon, the applicant's attorney sent in two things, one of which is the letter I sent on to you. The other thing is a draft habitat management plan, which I did not forward. I did not forward that because the record's closed and I wanted to not confuse or conflate those issues. And so yes, I do have that draft plan, but it hasn't, unless the board decides to reopen the record, I don't intend to send it off to the board. I also wanted to note that the issues that have been talked about a little bit with respect to the travel times and where gravel is available, this really is the time to talk about that, because that's one of the key issues in the ESEE findings. And as Commissioner Buck was noting, whether those outweigh the environmental impacts or not. And so that's certainly pertinent to your discussion. And then finally, I just wanted to make sure the board was aware that along with the other materials that have been delivered, there's included sort of 70 something pages of findings that are findings outside of the ESEE findings, having to do with all the other criteria that are part of this application. Those findings reflect positive findings on everything except for the conflict with big game. So I just wanted to make sure that the board's aware that's what is in those findings that go with the proposed order for denial, is findings containing a whole lot of positive findings plus that one negative. So with that, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, because when Vice Chair Farr mentioned that, I honestly did not know that what he was referring to, but you just articulated that. Thank you, Mr. Klein. Any other comments? Discussion? Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm not saying much because, as has been noted in other meetings, and as Commissioner Buck reminds us today, undoubtedly, no matter what action we take, whatever side is least happy with what we do will appeal, and so on and so forth. And I just need to say that when commissioners want to presuppose what a vote in one direction or another indicates or means, that's putting words in another commissioner's mouth and is not necessarily accurate. When comments are made like everything points in one direction except this one thing, when that one thing is a perfectly legitimate thing, that's why it's in the land use plan as a consideration, it doesn't make it less legitimate because it's the one thing. It's the one thing, and we're meant to weigh all the things. Looking at the EC today, yes, positive economic impact, as it specifically says to the applicant. The energy impacts, minimally positive, but I cannot ignore the fact that there are those two negative impacts. And I think there's, I also don't want to imply that those aren't significant. And there's that word significant again. In every single one of these hearings and meetings, we talk about the fact that there's squishy language, and any one of us can take that word significant, which is pretty subjective, and try to weight it in whatever direction. I'm sorry, Commissioner Bozovich, I believe I have the floor. Any one of us can take that word significant and bend it or use it to try to shore up our particular opinion or position in any way we want. And so I'm just wanting to note that there's been a lot of repeated comments and statements. Clearly, Commissioner Bozovich would like to once again likely restate things he's already stated several times today. Perhaps he has something new he'd like to say. But I just it's very clear to me, even though I'm the newest one here, that this issue is going to go on regardless almost of what we do. And so in the interest of furthering the process until its ultimate conclusion, that is why I'm not weighing in one way or another on how I will vote. But I just could not make those statements about how folks are sort of trying to put words in people's mouths and presuppose what a vote one way or the other indicates. And I would rather just let commissioners speak for themselves. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Commissioner Trieger. And yes, Commissioner Bozovich.
Let me say two things new. One, reopening the record is not an appealable action. So if we reopen the record, it doesn't mean that one side or the other is going to appeal. It just gives the applicant an opportunity to fix a problem. That's it. Two, there is a definition of significant. So I just want to say that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other commissioners want to weigh in on this? I would like to, I'm sorry, Vice Chair Farr, were you going to?
No, Chair, I'm just
I would just like to say that I don't believe this, for me, is as cut and dry as some would make it. I'm actually very much pro-growth, and in my construction capacity before this, trust me, we utilized wood, aggregate, all the materials one does in large construction projects. I'm acutely aware of several things. One, that this will not end with a vote of this board at this time. It will not. It will be appealed. And two, there's so many issues we cannot weigh in on. I agree with Commissioner Trieger's point that this is significant. I guess I've said that before. So you know what? I don't want to be accused of saying the same thing over and over again either. It's not cut and dry for me. There's pluses and cons on each side, but I know which way I'll vote on this. Do any other commissioners want to address this? Yes, Vice Chair Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. Mr. Clark did open up the discussion saying that now is the time to talk about the truckloads of aggregate that will be shipped up from either the confluence of the Mackenzie and Willamette or other places. Not too long ago, we as a board did unanimously approve the continuous operation of a gravel mine for public purposes. That's pretty remote from where we are right now, but I'm kind of curious. The number of truckloads of gravel that would come out of this mine, it was pretty much delineated by both the opposition and then by the applicant. Where are they going to come from? Where are those truckloads going to come from? And do big game cross the streets that those truckloads will be traveling on? So, Councillor Clark, I understand that you probably don't have an answer to that because who knows where aggregate's going to come from. But I think the closest aggregate mines are in the Eugene Springfield metropolitan area.
Mr. Clark, you did say it's important to discuss that. Do you want to provide insight into where these mines are right now as it relates to this?
I can't give you any details. The reason I said now is the time is, of course, because as part of the Goal 5 process, when you're talking about Goal 5 resources, is you need to decide if there's a conflict, decide if any conflicts are there, you can minimize them, and if not, need to go through this ESEE analysis portion that we're doing and you're deliberating about right now. That's part of the rule, and that's why issues about economics or environmental issues or energy, those things, the ESG and social, that's why it's relevant to today's discussion. And so that's why they stated that. As far as the findings that we've drafted up, the intent there is to reflect eventually the board's decision points in your final decision. And this is the opportunity, of course, to review those and let us know if anything needs changing or if they are satisfactory to you. As findings, they reflect sort of what is in the evidence or what's in the record as evidence right now. I don't recall, frankly, what evidence there might be about locations of alternative mines. I do know that the applicant submitted some information indicating that there's nothing particularly close. And so the idea that you would need to truck in gravel from elsewhere for projects in and around Oak Ridge is, I think, established in the record. But beyond that, in terms of details, Chair Farr, I can't say.
Thank you, Councillor. Then I will say this, Chair Burnett, the only reason I would bring that up, because that is past history. It's already been mitigated regarding the impact of the trucks on the immediate surrounding area. But the only reason I bring that up is that, trucks take an awful toll on the highway. I used to drive a 5-yard asphalt truck. 5 yards tiny compared to the trucks that would be rolling up and down Highway 58 to get this aggregate up and down the highway. The only reason I bring that up is because it is a large impact, the shipping of the gravel. Aggregate is our only local resource that's used in construction. Everything else can be shipped from someplace else. Aggregate cannot. It's just not cost-wise or carbon footprint-wise to ship aggregate over large distances. That's why that's why we have a Goal 5, so that we can take the resources close to the use, the sources as close to the use as possible. The only reason I bring that up Chair Bernie, is so that we could give the applicant a final chance to see if this last obstacle can be mitigated. If not, I'm prepared to drop it completely. But I want them to have every single chance, because I don't like the impact of trucks up and down Highway 58. I don't like that. I think we need to consider giving them every opportunity to respond. That's the reason that I'm pushing this at this time, Chair Bernie, and thank you for the latitude allowing me to speak.
Oh, absolutely, Vice Chair. I'm sorry, I see two more hands here. I thought I was going to kind of put this synopsize, but not quite yet. First, Commissioner Bozovich, and then Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to put one other piece of information out there, which is usually the board will put off decisions if we feel like we're missing information. And if we don't reopen the record, we will be making a decision not having all the information. It also puts the applicant at a disadvantage in that they don't get to have their habitat management plan as part of the record in the appeal process, because you can't bring anything new into an appeal process. So reopening the record will allow us to get that additional piece of information and then make a final decision. That's all I'm really asking for, is to reopen the record, let the applicant supply that information and opponents rebut, and then we make a final decision on this matter, rather than rushing to a decision now, forcing the applicant into an appeals process without being able to utilize that information. I don't see any reason why we can't reopen the record.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Buck?
Thank you, Chair. I believe our arguments are circulating around and around, and I would like to call the question.
So thank you, Commissioner Buck. The question is, I believe the motion that Commissioner Bozovich made, correct? Okay, forgive me. It's like, and that is, Commissioner, to reopen the record on this item, basically. And that was seconded by Commissioner Farr. When you call the question, does that mean I don't get to say anything else?
The non-debatable vote on whether another question is called. Just you take a vote on, do we call the question?
Right. And thank you very much, Vice Chair. I do appreciate the assistance. And if this is supported, so be it. And if this is denied, then we continue on, correct? Okay. All those in favor of the motion made by Commissioner Bozovich, seconded by Commissioner...
Voting in favor of calling the question
first.
Oh.
Yeah, so this is whether we want to go to a vote and cut off debate.
Okay, thank you. I wish these weren't public meetings. My lack of experience is very evident. So all those who want to call the question and end discussion and go for a vote, correct, on Commissioner Bozovich's proposal, signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed? What just happened?
Now we can vote on the motion without further debate.
Correct.
Is that right? Okay. Now, all those in favor of the motion made by Commissioner Bozovich to reopen and seconded by Commissioner Farr, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Nay.
Nay.
So that motion is defeated, 3 votes to 2. Commissioners Bozovich and Farr in the minority. And now we don't have a motion before us, and I would like to review the 3 options that this body has. We can move to adopt the order, support the findings, for supporting findings and economic, social, environmental, and energy findings denying the application, or We can move to tentatively approve the order and direct staff to revise the order findings or draft EC findings denying the application and return on a date certain. Or the third option, I think we just voted down, move to tentatively approve ordinance PA 1385, approve the fifth reading and set a sixth reading and direct staff to prepare a final draft of the ordinance with supporting findings. All I want to say at this point is that this is not a partisan issue. I believe in declarations. 4 of the 5 commissioners all have received campaign donations from one of the principals in this application. So this is not partisan. I want to say that that whatever the vote, this will not be the last time that we hear of this. This will continue as a proposal. And I need a motion. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I'll make a motion to adopt Order 21-10-26-06, supporting the findings in economic, social, environmental, and energy, SE or EZ, findings denying the application.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Buck and seconded by Commissioner Trieger to basically accept the findings denying the application. Is that correct, Commissioner Buck? Is there discussion to this motion? Commissioner Bozovich.
I just want to clarify for the record that had my motion to reopen passed, I would have had to make a 4th motion that's not suggested by staff to hold the record open and move the reading to another reading. So just so you know, I was working towards a 4th option there.
Commissioner Bozovich, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the 3 options. How would yours have been different? And I apologize.
You wouldn't have moved to adopt or tentatively approve or even approve the order at this time because we hadn't gotten the new information back. The record hadn't been closed again. So it basically would just been a way of continuing the reading till past the record closing again and getting the information in. So yeah, none of those motions would have worked. I'd had to draft a motion from scratch that would have held the record open. So just so you know, thank you. That's what I was working towards. I just want to clarify that.
No, and forgive me, commissioners, I appreciate the clarification. Is there any other discussion towards this motion? Seeing and hearing none, it has been moved by Commissioner Buck and seconded by Commissioner Trieger to move adoption of the order supporting findings in economic, social, environmental, and energy findings denying the application. Commissioner Buck, did I state that correctly? There's my answer.
Wrong button. Yeah, it's basically option 1 on our screen.
It's option 1, which is what I read. Thank you very much. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Need a roll call vote, Chair.
Oh, boy, this is my afternoon. Please, I'm sorry.
Chair Bernie, Andy Clark, and actually you don't need a roll call. This is to approve an order, not the ordinance, so you're fine.
I think I've made more apologies than mistakes this afternoon. Mr. Mokrahajski, Mr. Clark said we don't need a roll call. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All those in favor of
an order, not an ordinance. We typically do a roll call on an ordinance.
Thank you, sir. All those in favor of the order, which I repeated so long ago I forgot, but it's basically option number 1, moved by Commissioner Buck, seconded by Commissioner Trieger. Please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Hey.
Let the record show that
Chair,
option.
Can I get a clarification on that? Because I'm sorry, but I think it has to be a roll call. This is the fifth reading of an ordinance, PA 1385. And doesn't that, even though there's an order also attached to it, weren't we also approving, or I guess we're denying the ordinance. Never mind. I think I get what Andy's getting to. It's confusing that we have an ordinance up on the agenda and we're not taking a roll call vote.
Commissioner Bozievich, I've been interrupted by far worse than yourself, sir, so no problem whatsoever. The motion, which is option 1, to move adoption of the order, has approved 3 votes to 2, Vice Chair Farr and Commissioner Bozievich in the minority. Are we good on that process?
And now the ordinance.
Oh, well, thank you, Vice Chair. Please tell me, I'm really going to yield to you. Do we now need to take another vote, being a roll call vote?
Mr. Clark can confirm this, but I believe that we need to vote on ordinance PA 1385.
And in this case, we don't. Admittedly, it's a strange process because the ordinance would be required if we were going to approve the application, because the application would require amendments to the comprehensive plan and the zoning regs, and we do that by ordinance. In this case, if the board's decision is to deny the application, none of those things would be done. So we just need an order saying it's denied, and with the findings that support that, and then so we're done at this point. Thank you.
And the ordinance dies then. The ordinance is no more.
Correct.
So the ordinance is dead. No need to vote on it.
Right, we just voted. Okay. Commissioners, we're now going to go to number 15 on our agenda today. I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry, Commissioner Trieger, please.
That's fine. Thank you. Something I neglected to mention that I just wanted to say for anyone in the public that is watching is we received an email from staff and confirmation from council that we had in fact been within proper process and allowed significant and adequate time for response. I just wanted to say that was a large, I just want to be sure that, because the conversation could be construed, some of Commissioner's comments could be construed as that we shut down an opportunity for people to respond to one of the concerns. And I think what was the point of contention was whether it was significant or enough time, or that reopening the record would have done that. So I just wanted to make clear, because I'm realizing I'm working off of information that maybe not everyone who's watching in real time had that same statement of information as we had available to us, that the applicants' argument that they didn't have time to present new evidence, that they weren't given time. And in fact, we were assured that we did.
I see your hand, Commissioner. I would just like to say this is the agenda item that will not go away. I thought we had voted, but yeah, thank you, Commissioner Trieger. I think that was good to point out. And yes, Commissioner Bozievich.
So as long as we're going to continue a deliberation that's already been closed because a vote's been taken,
Yeah, that was my point.
I will note for the record that I never said that we didn't allow correct process time. I talked about what's fair, not what's correct. And what would have been fair would be to reopen the record, not what's necessarily, yes, we met some statutory deadlines that we as a board arbitrarily set those dates and deadlines for record closing, rebuttals, et cetera. And we had a request to reopen, and I think it would have been fair to reopen. I never said we didn't follow our arbitrary deadlines.
And if I may, I contributed to this because I read a letter that stated that wasn't the reason, that what we did was wrong and unlawful. And that's the only letter I read, by the way. So we are now going to move onto item number 15 after we take a deep breath. Commissioner business. Do any commissioners have any announcements? Seeing none. Are there, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Vice Chair Farr.
Chair Bernie, something I telegraphed earlier in the meeting is kind of someplace in between announcements and future board assignment requests.
Please.
So
Why don't you do that now, Commissioner?
Okay, and I sent a copy of the letter that had been forwarded to me by Andy Smith from Association of Oregon Counties. A letter that's been signed by commissioners from Benton County and Lincoln County already as of yesterday when I received this letter. And it's a call for action to fund expanded mediation to address eviction crisis. Specifically, if you look down to the bolded section in the middle of the first page of the letter, we write to you today with a very simple and clear request. The letter is addressed to, by the way, House Speaker Tina Kotek and Senate President Peter Courtney. We urge the Oregon legislature to immediately allocate $2.5 million to expand the capacity of our existing statewide community mediation system to meet eviction case demands across Oregon. The letter goes into more detail, but that is the gist of the letter. It's also signed by Patrick Sponsor from the University of Oregon's Office for Community Dispute Resolution, and they would be the arbiter in such a action as if the legislature were to allocate the money. So my request is that we give Chair Burney a head nod to sign this as a Board of County Commissioners.
Before the head, it looks like Mr. Mokrahajski would like to weigh in.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to share some additional. I spoke with Mr. Kyler, so I want to share just some additional context from what Commissioner Farr. I think this is supporting Commissioner Farr's request here. That is to say that first of all, our legislative principles that the board has adopted would support you signing on to this letter. You certainly can give head nods. I think it's also, this is one of the nice things about having these legislative principles and priorities is that we have the ability really to sign on to it even without that, but I think it's helpful certainly for the board to understand this is coming forward. Commissioner Farr referenced the University of Oregon, and the University of Oregon has a long-standing mediation program that currently receives state funding for support. The U of O is involved with authoring, I think it may be the same letter that Commissioner Farr is referring to, advocating to gain additional state funding to support targeted mediation work around evictions stemming from COVID-19. In addition, the law library received a small tranche of grant funding to work with the Eugene Springfield Tenants Association to bolster pro se resources for those facing evictions. So that's from Mr. Kyler. So I just wanted to share that additional information with you, and we certainly, the staff would support having the chair sign on to that.
Would anyone like to make a comment before we ask for head nods? Commissioner Buck.
Well, this is a comment and a head nod, but I just want to say that this is an extremely successful program and is in desperate need by the community. And so I'm very supportive.
Yes, right, Commissioner Farr.
Ever so briefly, Chair Burney, you know, our local landlords have been very accommodating, and we've worked very closely with them regarding help on veterans housing and many different things. So I wanted to make certain that this wasn't going to have adverse effect on the renters and the Renters Association, and I have been assured that it does not. So.
My only comment would be that, one, it would be an honor to sign the letter. I looked at it over lunch. And two, in that Commissioner brought this to me, it would also be an honor to have him co-sign it as vice chair, if that would be okay with the rest of the board. With that friendly amendment, are there thumbs up, head nods that will go forth and get this letter out? Okay, thank you. It looks unanimous to me. Thank you very much, Vice Chair. I actually have one that's sort of nebulous also in between announcements and future board assignments. As you know, one of my assignments with this body is to serve on the Lane Workforce Partnership, and I chair that. The Lane Workforce Partnership would like the Lane County Board of Commissioners to join what looks like virtually every city board of commissioners, community college, locally. That includes Homes for Good, Delta Sand and Gravel, IBEW, NECA. I mean, it's quite the collaboration, discussing $50 million investment over a period of time as it relates to action on workforce training and reemployment. I want to announce that I'm going to forward this to Mr. Mokrahysky. I'm going to ask him to forward this to all board members so that we can get a head nod to allow our logo to join what you will see is just a real cross section of our community needing a trained and workforce that wants to go to work. I mean, that's a whole other cultural thing right now that's going on. So I wanted to simply announce that on behalf of Executive Director Christina Payne and let you know that will be forthcoming. So it's not a surprise. Are there any, now that we're now moving out of the gray land between board announcements and future board assignment requests, are there any future board assignment requests? Seeing none, I have a request. Sorry. Especially given the discussion last board meeting, I believe it was last one, where Public Works presented on the water and sewer line connecting Short Mountain, if you recall, to the Metropolitan Wastewater Facility. And ironically, talking about the number of trucks that would get off the road regarding the carrying of leachate and all the other positives. I would like to request that Mr. Hurley, the Director of Public Works, who is aware of this request, Mr. Mokrahysky, don't think I'm going behind anyone's back here, that he reach out for about a 15-minute presentation to this board from Mr. Stephen Miller about how Oregon law has now changed and created new recycling and waste to energy opportunities, allowing them to pencil. The implications for Short Mountain. Mr. Miller is a subject matter expert. He frequently consults our Oregon U.S. senators, and he's the president of a pretty significant business called Bulk Handling, the fourth largest industrial recycling and waste to energy presence in landfills around the world. He came to attention to me when Public Works escorted a group of us to look at some pretty significant facilities in the Bay Area. I would like, if I get enough head nods, to make the request that he present to us so we get a sense of the range of possibilities that are before us. Is that okay? I see enough head nods and I appreciate that. I think you'll find him very informative. I didn't see any other future board assignment requests. Am I missing anyone? Mr. Mokrahysky, review of assignments.
So we have Commissioner Farr's request to have the chair and vice chair sign on to the eviction mediation funding letter. And then your request, Commissioner Burney, you were going to send me, you said you were going to send me a letter regarding the workforce development, and then I'll forward it around to the commissioners.
Yes,
Yeah.
and so when we bring it up, everyone has information.
Right. Okay. And then your request that you just had now for a presentation by Public Works and Mr. Miller at Bulk Handling regarding recycling opportunities between Short Mountain and I think that generally captures it, recycling opportunities.
Yeah, and a vision of what's possible with the change of Oregon state law. Yes.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. That's everything I had.
Commissioners, did Mr. Mokrahysky miss anything? Okay. It is 2:52. I'm going to suggest 10 minutes between when Ms. Jones reads us into executive session and when we convene executive session. So why don't we say we will convene at 3:05, and Ms. Jones, if you would read us in, that would be great. Ms. Jones, you're always there. What happened?
Oh, I am here. Sorry, I unmuted myself, or I muted myself. This is the language for executive session for Tuesday, October 26th, The Board of County Commissioners will meet in executive session to consider the employment of a public officer, employee, staff member, or individual agent. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.6602A, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. We reserve the right to come back out into public session should the need arise.
Thank you very much, and we will convene executive session at 3:05. Thank you.